He sailed west seeking Asia, but found a world Europe never knew. His voyage brought glory, conquest, and consequences that changed history forever. In 1492, one voyage changed the world forever. In 1500, a ship approached Spain through the cold morning mist. A prisoner sat below deck, his wrists locked in iron chains. This prisoner was the navigator once celebrated for crossing the Atlantic. 8 years earlier, kings had praised him as a hero. Now he returned in disgrace. How had his triumph ended this way? To understand those chains, we must return to the beginning. The navigator carried an idea that most people considered dangerously impossible. He believed Asia could be reached by sailing west across the Atlantic. The world was round, but he badly underestimated its enormous size. An unknown ocean stood between his calculations and the truth.
Columbus was born in Genoa around the year 1451. He did not begin life as a prince, scholar, or commander.
He came from a working family and learned through the sea. Trading voyages exposed him to storms, maps, ports, and sailors' stories.
Slowly, he became convinced that a western route to Asia existed.
Columbus studied ancient geography, travel accounts, and nautical charts. But he combined uncertain measurements with dangerously optimistic assumptions. He imagined Asia extending much farther east than it actually did. He also believed the Earth was far smaller than reality. Without an unknown continent, his ships could never have reached Asia. His greatest mistake became the reason he dared to sail. Columbus first carried his proposal to the powerful Portuguese court. Experienced navigators and royal experts carefully examined his calculations. They rejected the plan because the estimated distance appeared dangerously wrong. But Columbus refused to surrender his dream after the rejection. He turned towards Spain, carrying maps and promises of unimaginable wealth. For years, the navigator waited while Spain fought against Granada. Then, in 1492, the Spanish crown accepted the navigator's proposal. Success would make him Admiral of the oceans in sea. He would govern new lands and receive part of their wealth. The rewards were extraordinary, because the risk seemed almost impossible.
Before sunrise on August 3, 1492, 3 ships left Palos. They were the Niña, the Pinta, and the larger Santa Maria.
Roughly 90 men sailed into the Atlantic with the navigator.
Some wanted wealth, while others followed duty or adventure.
Beyond the Canary Islands, there would be no guaranteed return. After repairs in the Canary Islands, the fleet sailed west. The final familiar land slowly disappeared behind the three ships.
Steady winds pushed them deeper into an unknown ocean. At first, the powerful wind appeared to be a blessing. Then the sailors feared it might prevent their journey home. Days became weeks, but no solid land appeared ahead. Floating weeds and distant birds repeatedly raised their hopes. Each hopeful sign vanished into another empty horizon. Taxoharis. The navigator recorded the distance and ordered the fleet onward.
One question spread quietly. What if the ocean never ended?
Then the ship's compasses began behaving in an unfamiliar way. Their needles no longer aligned with the North Star as expected. Today, this mysterious movement is understood as magnetic variation. To the frightened sailors, nature itself seemed to be changing.
The ship's navigator offered an explanation, but the uneasiness remained aboard. By October, the sailors' fear had sharpened into anger.
They believed the fleet had sailed dangerously far from home. The navigator pointed toward birds, reeds, and carved pieces of wood.
On October 11, every sailor searched the darkness ahead.
Before dawn, a sudden cry crossed the black water. Land! On October 12, Columbus stepped onto the island of Guanahani. The island was probably located somewhere in the modern Bahamas.
He claimed it for Spain and renamed it San Salvador.
But this was not an empty world awaiting discovery.
The Taíno watched the unfamiliar visitors arrive from the sea.
The first exchanges between the two groups appeared peaceful.
The Taíno offered water, food, cotton, and small ornaments.
The Europeans exchanged beads, bells, and brightly colored caps.
Neither group fully understood the other's words or intentions.
Beneath this peaceful meeting, a coming catastrophe had already begun.
Some Taíno people wore small pieces of shining gold.
That faint glimmer immediately changed the voyage's direction. The expedition officer used gestures to ask where the metal originated.
Every uncertain answer appeared to point toward another island.
Gold was no longer evidence of success. It became an obsession. Columbus took several indigenous people aboard as guides and interpreters. They were carried between islands while the expedition searched for wealth.
Beautiful coastlines concealed the voyage's increasingly clear purpose.
Spain wanted valuable resources, claimed territory, and evidence of success.
Columbus had found land, but not the riches he promised.
In late October, the three ships reached the coast of Cuba. Its enormous coastline convinced Columbus that Asia must be close.
He sent men inland, expecting cities of the Great Khan. Instead, they found villages, cultivated fields, and unfamiliar communities. The evidence changed, but the navigator refused to change his conclusion.
Today, Haiti and the Dominican Republic share this island.
Columbus saw rivers, fertile valleys, and possible signs of gold. He imagined the center of a powerful Spanish Atlantic empire.
Then, on Christmas night, disaster struck his flagship. During a quiet night watch, the Santa Maria struck a reef.
By morning, Columbus's damaged flagship was breaking apart. The crew survived, but the remaining ships lacked enough space. Salvaged timber was carried ashore to build a small fort.
The expedition named the settlement La Navidad, meaning Christmas. The expedition left 39 men behind at the settlement of La Navidad.
They received supplies, weapons, and instructions to search for gold. Local leader Guacanagari had offered assistance to the stranded Europeans. But the isolated settlers were divided and dangerously undisciplined. La Navidad disappeared behind the trees and entered history's mystery.
Violent Atlantic storms nearly destroyed Columbus during the return journey. He feared his report might vanish beneath the ocean with him.
The damaged ships finally reached Europe in March 1493. The returning expedition carried ornaments, plants, birds, and several indigenous people taken far from their homeland. To the Spanish court, these objects promised a profitable future.
Columbus entered the Spanish royal court as a celebrated hero.
Printed reports of his voyage quickly spread across Europe.
He received new honors, titles, and permission to return. But his reports concealed a dangerous and growing misunderstanding. The first voyage brought exploration. The second would bring colonization. Columbus sailed again in September 1493 with 17 ships. Between 1,200 and 1,500 people joined the expedition. Soldiers, priests, craftsmen, animals, seeds, and weapons crossed the Atlantic. Spain now intended to establish permanent settlements and extract wealth.
La Navidad had been burned completely to the ground.
None of the 39 settlers Columbus left behind had survived. The exact sequence of events remains uncertain, even today.
Reports described abuse, division, conflict, and violent retaliation.
The dream of easy conquest had received its first answer: resistance.
Columbus moved east and founded another settlement called La Isabela.
Stone buildings and planned streets began rising beside the sea. But food spoiled, sickness spread, and exhausted settlers weakened. Gold did not lie waiting for them in enormous piles. Their disappointment grew as the promised route to Asia failed to appear. The Spanish crown expected wealth, and the expedition leadership urgently needed evidence of success. Expeditions pushed inland, while forts rose across Hispaniola. Small quantities of gold were collected from the island, but the amount was far below the expedition's grand promises. Soon he sought value in land, labor, and human lives.
Taíno communities faced tribute demands, coerced labor, and the loss of their freedom.
Indigenous captives were transported across the dangerous Atlantic Ocean. The journey and its aftermath brought devastating loss to many families.
Exploitation became central to the colony's search for profit.
Oil man. The celebrated navigator was becoming an increasingly dangerous colonial governor.
Some Taíno leaders resisted the expanding Spanish presence on Hispaniola.
Resistance was met by organized military patrols using horses and trained dogs. Warfare, forced labor, hunger, and displacement devastated indigenous communities. European diseases caused further destruction across the Caribbean. The peaceful shore of 1492 was rapidly disappearing. Columbus understood ships, winds, maps, and navigation. Governing hungry, angry, and disappointed settlers was completely different.
Colonists complained about rationing, discipline, and the power held by the governor's relatives.
Mutiny and political rivalry spread throughout the struggling colony. His greatest enemy was no longer the ocean, but his administration. Columbus returned to Spain in 1496 to defend his record. He arrived without the unstoppable wealth his supporters had expected. Nevertheless, the Spanish crown approved another voyage across the Atlantic. Columbus still believed that a route to Asia was close. In 1498, he sailed west for the third time. The third voyage reached Trinidad and the Gulf of Paria. An immense flow of fresh water surrounded the expedition's ships. The powerful current came from South America's Orinoco River. Only an enormous landmass could produce that much fresh water. Yet Columbus continued interpreting the evidence through his belief in Asia.
The returning expedition reached Hispaniola and found the colony in open revolt.
Settlers demanded land, payment, and access to indigenous labor. The colonial governor negotiated concessions while struggling to restore order.
Every compromise weakened his authority over the colony. Finally, the Spanish crown sent a judge with sweeping power.
Francisco de Bobadilla arrived in Hispaniola during the year 1500. He found unrest, executions, unpaid settlers, and bitter accusations. Bobadilla seized control from Columbus and his powerful brothers.
He removed the colonial leaders from office and ordered their return to Spain.
The Admiral of the Ocean Sea was placed in chains.
Columbus's journey home was nothing like his earlier triumphant return. The ship's captain reportedly offered to remove his iron restraints.
The former governor refused, insisting that only the Spanish crown could formally release him.
Later accounts say he preserved the chains as a symbol. But Spain still considered the disgraced explorer potentially useful.
The Spanish crown ordered the former governor to be formally released. But they refused to restore him as governor of Hispaniola. His political empire in the Caribbean was effectively over.
Still, the aging navigator remained determined to find a passage to Asia. In 1502, the crown approved one final voyage.
The aging navigator departed with 4 ships, accompanied by his young son. Near Hispaniola, he warned that a powerful storm was approaching.
The colonial governor refused to let his fleet enter the harbor. An outgoing Spanish fleet sailed directly into the devastating hurricane. Columbus survived, but his former captor, Bobadilla, did not. The expedition explored the dangerous coastline of Central America. Columbus searched desperately for a passage into the Indian Ocean.
Powerful storms repeatedly battered the 4 aging wooden ships.
Shipworms bored through their hulls as vital supplies disappeared. The expedition was slowly being destroyed beneath the waterline. In June 1503, the expedition deliberately beached its final 2 ships. The stranded crews built shelters across the damaged wooden decks. 2 messengers began a difficult canoe journey toward Hispaniola. Months passed while hunger, sickness, and rebellion divided the survivors. Then the local communities stopped providing food to the strangers. Columbus discovered an approaching lunar eclipse inside an astronomical almanac.
He used this knowledge to frighten Jamaica's local leaders.
He claimed the darkening moon would reveal divine anger.
On February 29, 1504, the eclipse arrived as predicted. Food resumed, and Columbus had turned knowledge into control. Rescue finally reached Columbus and his stranded men in 1504.
He returned to Spain, exhausted, ill, and without his passage. Queen Isabella died soon afterward, weakening his royal influence.
Columbus spent his final years demanding titles and unpaid income.
He died in Valladolid on May 20, 1506.
Columbus never understood the full geography of the lands he reached.
Those lands were already home to millions of indigenous people. His voyages created a permanent connection across the Atlantic.
That connection carried crops, animals, people, ideas, conquest, and disease.
Columbus was a gifted navigator, but a deeply failed governor.
His name remains suspended between historic achievement and human catastrophe.
He searched for Asia and opened a door history could never close.